I'm Bill Simmons, Artistic Director of the Phoenix Theater Cultural Center in downtown Indianapolis. And on this beautiful day in October, I am talking with Lou Harry, one of our city's esteemed critics, a beautiful journalist, a playwright, an all-around good egg. How are you, Lou?
I'm doing okay. How are you?
I'm okay.
Very good.
So we're now 7 months into this pandemic, and I like to start these conversations with friends with kind of where you are, where you're heading, kind of what's on your plate and what you're hoping for the future.
Oh boy. Okay, that's a lot right there. Let's see if we can cover most
Well,
of
we
it.
can break it down into segments.
First of all, where I am in my home office at the moment. I'm working full time, as I have been for the past closing in on 2 years, with the Society of Professional Journalists, which is a national organization that supports professional journalists around the country, fights for freedom of speech, but also encourages use of a code of ethics and making sure that journalists are doing good work and helping them do good work through awards programs, through educational programs. I edit the magazine that the Society of Professional Journalists members get, called Quill. You can check it out at quillmag.com. You don't have to be a member to read. So that's the full-time job.
Yeah, let me hold on before we go any further,
Sure.
Lou. I want to kind of delve into that because as a former journalist myself, I really have been concerned with this administration's attack on the media, that, you know, and Trump using the term enemy of the people. I don't even think he has any idea that's an Ibsen play about a doctor who tried to alert the town, like, people are gonna die if you do this, and like, we need to make money, so shut up. And that the media is not this liberal monolith. The media is Fox News and MSNBC and PBS and the Atlantic Magazine and the New York Times and the New Yorker and the Washington.
And a dozen radio shows around the country that are spouting, you know,
Right.
rumors and
So where are you with that in the work that you're doing? Because I feel like that's really important, what you just said you're doing.
a lot of the work is on both sides of it. Not only is it working with journalists, but it's also working on educational programs that help the public become more media savvy, become better understanding of how to fact check material, how to challenge when they find something incorrect, or if they perceive a bias, where's that coming from? Helping them understand the difference between opinion, which many publications do, and actual news, and how those things balance. Also, the need for facts within opinion pieces. We just finished a year-long program in Casper, Wyoming, actually, with Wyoming being the state that a study had shown had the most negative view of the press. And we did a series of programs in Casper, listening to what those complaints were, trying to find out where that mistrust was coming from, and bringing citizens into newsrooms to see how news actually works, and bringing national figures to them. That ended with a program that I was lucky enough to attend and write about, that featured editors from the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, BuzzFeed. And it was an incredibly impressive program that is still, I think, hovering out there online.
Well done. That's really lovely.
So we're trying to bridge that gap. There are still people who, you know, who will throw terms like, you know, the liberal media out there, or fake news and that sort of thing, whenever there's something that they disagree with. But we want to examine where those perceived biases come from, and knowing that there are places that sort of put themselves under that media umbrella that are blatantly biased, and figuring out what that means and how the public can parse that. It used to be really clear when you got your newspaper where the opinion section was.
Right.
But now, with most people getting their getting their information online, it's less clear when somebody forwards a story and you're only reading the headline, and it's from let's say a New York Times editorial writer writing an opinion piece. But it's easy for somebody to say, oh, look at that, the New York Times has liberal bias. because they're looking at an opinion piece that's being forwarded to them with that sort of guidance to them by whoever's sending it along. So anyway, we're climbing uphill on this because the administration is trying to undermine credibility for the press. Because if you could work to destroy the credibility of the watchdogs, then nobody is watching the dogs.
Right. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. You call into question those people who are calling you into question.
Right.
And it's like, yeah, and it just troubles me greatly that in a democracy such as ours, the media historically they've provided a critical role of safeguarding regardless of who's in office.
Sure. And I'm empowered
I
mean, one of the things I'm also tasked with at SBJ is helping run their awards programs. And when I see the quality of work and the intensity of the work that's being done by journalists around the country under incredibly adverse conditions, some of whom have almost, have very limited tools to work with. And now they're trying to do that under the necessary COVID restrictions. It is incredible the amount of and the quality of the investigative work that's being done by journalists that's benefiting civilians. I mean, you look at the story of the FBI investigation just now up in Michigan of this attempted militia action. Journalists are the ones telling that story. So
that's a remarkable story, and bless the journalists for continuing to do this. So, what is your prognosis about journalism? I know there was a movement in the last few years to try to move journalists to, can this be a not-for-profit where,
right.
Your foundations are supporting this work, or, something like Central Indiana Community Foundation, toyed with that for a while. Yeah. Is that the future? And then maybe we segue into like the arts and coverage.
I think there's going to be a lot of experimentation and exploration over the next couple of years. Mm-hmm. And there already is. And part of that is because it's becoming a more difficult model to sustain. Now, part of that, it can be blamed on the industry. Part of that can be blamed on when newspapers went from being family-owned businesses, where just that entity had to be a profit, ultimately a profit, or at least break even, to a corporate entity where a national organization or international organization owns 50 newspapers, and they want to see quarterly results every time. That was compounded by, the internet's been a huge blessing and a huge curse for legitimate media, news media. On the one hand, it's easier to disseminate stories. It's easier to collect information. It's easier to do a lot of those things that are required for journalists. However, it's become easier to count clicks. And there are many organizations, and this will segue into arts coverage, where it used to be you had a print paper, and let's say, or a print magazine, and those stories were looked at kind of how they contributed to the whole. What was the entire picture of this publication? You opened your thick Sunday newspaper, and you had all these different sections, and you might have ignored half of them, and you might have flipped through some, or you might have read one story and then happened to glance at another story and then move into that piece and read something that you hadn't planned on reading. That serendipity idea. So then we went to the internet, where most of the readers shifting in that direction, now we're able to count how many people look at every story. So with some publications, that becomes the driving force. Well, if we can get, for instance, here in Indianapolis, if you can get 10,000 hits for a story about the Colts quarterback, but you can only get 200 stories about a review for a local dance production or a local theater production, if you're strictly looking at those numbers, you're easily saying, well, why are we bothering?
Right.
You set a standard where you say, well, you know what, if a story doesn't get, depend on the publication, for some 200 clicks is great, for some 1,000 is great, for some 5,000 is great. If we don't get that many clicks, then we shouldn't bother. And that becomes the thinking, and that's why you're not seeing arts reviews, particularly, looking particularly at critical coverage. You're not seeing arts reviews in most publications anymore. because they're not going to get the kind of hits that another story. And, it's foolish to think that they can. However, I believe that they are still incredibly cost effective. They still broaden the picture of what you're doing. And, to me, a newspaper of record for a city should represent what's going on in the city.
Yeah, I would
And
agree.
if you're
That's
not
what
doing that, then you're a popularity contest
yeah.
for readers.
I think that's what so many cities now have lost, is that a newspaper of record, and then the supporting publications that filled in particular niches around it. But something back, 50, 100 years ago, there would be 2 and 3 papers covering a really big city.
Yeah.
Like you just said, it's like maybe you didn't read everything, but the fact that you knew what was going on was comforting, right, to me. And I didn't always read the obits, but I like to see, did I know anybody? Did I cover, and so I do. I feel like we've really lost. It's not just a nostalgia feeling I have. It's like, no, there's something that's missing that knits a community together.
Right. But we're also, so if we look at the flip side of that, one of the things that has happened, which I think is positive, and we're just starting to see a little more of that, is, especially when it comes to arts criticism, a little less of the ivory tower. I'm up here judging, and I'm separated from my readers. I'm separated from everything else. I'm just passing judgment. I'm giving a grade to something. Because it's become so much easier for anybody to start a website, anyone to lob in with an opinion, the sort of Yelp idea of reviewing. Now, a lot of that isn't readable, a lot of that isn't thought through, and a lot of it is top of the head. However, it has shined a light on the fact that most of what was being written by those critics were stuff by older white men. And what the internet has allowed is for other voices to be heard, maybe not with the same megaphone that others, but it's opened up the conversation to say the people who have been commenting on the arts and have had the largest platforms have largely been white people and largely white male and largely skewing older. So I think there are ways to explore how to democratize that a little more. I'm not a believer in, everyone's voice is equally valid. I still think a critic's role should be to experience a work, to bring in thoughtful commentary about that, and to engage. I'm always cautious of the word entertain, but to engage the reader in that conversation. And then it's sort of on them now. It's easier to have that conversation. If somebody wrote a review 25 years ago, maybe they would get a letter to the editor, but that would be the limit of the contact. Now somebody comments immediately, and there's a choice of whether to engage in that conversation, to be part of that conversation or not. So I appreciate that some of those walls are coming down, because I think it leads to, one, more educated and rounded critics, and also a more diverse field of voices that we're hearing and perspectives that we're hearing. And those are all ones we can learn from. But I think we need to shake the idea that critics function as consumer reports. And that's a tough thing to wrestle with, that it's not about, I'm telling you, which iron you should buy, or which refrigerator you should buy, which show you should go to. I think it's more about creating a culture where the culture is worth discussing and worth having conversations about.
Yeah,
the critic can foster that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent philosophy, is, have to create a meaningful context for people to further discuss what they saw. Or, based on what Lou was telling me, what should I be thinking? What should I be preparing myself for when I do go to see the show, and allowing it to wash over me?
Or the flip of that, which is not even seeing it before the show. It's maybe afterwards going, oh, I saw that. Oh, let me hear what a different thoughtful opinion is about that play. And that does that. Or, man, I missed that. Now I'm more inspired to go see something later because I missed it. When I was doing this full time, my philosophy was, I don't care as much about whether you read something I write and then immediately go decide whether or not to go see that performance or that production or that art exhibition, but rather over the course of a year or whatever, if you're reading this stuff regularly and seeing it in a mainstream-ish publication, then that's saying that this stuff is worth paying attention to. Maybe I should go see more. And if over the course
Yeah.
of a year you went to 3 more art shows or 3 more dance performances, or read 3 additional books that it didn't matter to me as much whether you went to the things that I liked or had a stronger feeling for. To me, it was more getting you out more to see more stuff and to experience more stuff and to open your mind and heart to more. It's, bodies at rest tend to stay at rest. It's easy to stay home. You have lots of TV choices.
Certainly do. You certainly do. And that's I think something that we're all wrangling with in the professional theater world, which is, while we're in this great pause, what comes next? How are we spending our time to be prepared for what comes next? So what are your thoughts about 2021?
What's coming next? It's all speculative for all of us at this point.
Sure.
After 9/11, which only, the sort of pause there in the arts was pretty brief, although there was some time of what do we do? What do people want? I mean, you look at what happened on Broadway, suddenly the most popular shows were really escapist stuff. It was stuff like The Producers and Mamma Mia and Spamalot were like the big, so the feeling was, people want to get away from, the news. They want to have fun. Well, we're in a different kind of crisis here now.
Yes.
Because of multiple forces.
Yeah, this is much more largely existential. Like majority of us are going to survive, but there is an existential question going on, I think, for all of the arts. So
it's what do we present and what does an audience want to see? There are some, I hear people talking about people are going to want meaty stuff. They're going to want that event that they go to touch them, to move them, to make them think, to do whatever. And then you have people saying people are going to want to get out and have fun. And I don't know what that balance is going to be. I think it depends. I think it's going to be more about what has that particular company done in the past to create a loyalty for its core audience, and what is it doing in this interim time to stay relevant, and how is it going to adapt to the new, not entirely new to a certain audience and new in the spotlight expectations for things like diversity and inclusion. It was easy to ignore those things 10 years ago for a largely white arts community. It was easy to say, well, we'll do the August Wilson play in February. And that's what you do. And God love August Wilson. I'll see as many of them as possible, as often as possible. But there was, now with that other force happening, with the I See You White Theater expectation out there, with an understanding that we live in a culturally biased world, and with a lot of pressure being put, and often for very good reason, on the arts community to do that. Well, those who haven't laid the groundwork for this change and this evolution, I think, could face serious trouble. On the other hand, that conversation often happens with an urban bias. That conversation often happens about where the primary focus are major cities where there is a larger population that has clearly been ignored.
Right.
That's going to be harder, and the questions are different for smaller communities. If you're in Chicago and you can't find a you know, talented actor from almost any ethnic group to match the character as described by the playwright for a piece, then you're not trying very hard. But if you're in a small town with a community theater where the population is 99% white, the questions become, do you ignore those plays because you don't find somebody who's, you know, matches the description of that character perfectly or very close? And so do you ignore those plays completely? I'm not saying what should be done, but I'm saying the questions are different, at least a little bit, from market to market.
Yeah.
But
Oh
those
God.
are ones that organizations have to wrestle with now. And it's not just about who we're seeing on stage. It's not just about who the playwrights are, which those things are vitally important, but it's also about who's in your boardroom and who are your funders and how are you trying to be diverse by saying, hey, we want to find this audience, or are you really communicating with the community and trying to find what will work in partnership with the community and not just, hey, we're doing a Black play, why aren't the Black people coming? That is a dead end.
Right.
So it's these two forces. We're in this great pause right now, and we're becoming much more socially aware right now. It's harder to change something while it's moving, but now we have a lot of time to think through some of this.
Yes, we do. We do. And
And
I think we have a lot of time ahead of us before we're going to be producing back inside of buildings.
right,
Yeah. No,
and
I absolutely agree with you. I think if you have to change you have to change your organization at every tier, the board, the staff, the artists involved. If you're really going to be reflective of the community, and Indianapolis is 30% people of color.
right,
So there's no reason why in 5 years the Phoenix Theater Board should not be at least that. The artists on our stage last year met that, and next season, if it's a season we're hoping to be able to do indoors, it again will at least meet that 30% of the artists creating the work in the rehearsal room, and at least 30% of those on stage.
right. Unfortunately, we have to overcome, and this is on audience, and it's also an educational process. We have to overcome the idea that the norm is a play that's largely about white people,
Right.
and that a play that has Black characters or Hispanic characters or Latinx characters, whatever, is a play for that community.
Yeah, exactly.
You know,
Exactly.
these are
Exactly.
and
The material now,
but
Lou, is exactly that. It's
but
like what are the stories that are universal? They're just told through a. I just read a play by an MFA student at IU Bloomington, a third year, and it's a lovely play. The playwright herself is of Jamaican, Puerto Rican ancestry, grew up in the Bronx, and she's written this beautiful two-hander about two sisters and their fathers, dying, and there's a will, and all the family secrets come out while they're making sancocho, which is the unofficial dish of a lot of the countries in the Caribbean, the Dominican Republics, Puerto Rico, Cuba, Honduras. But it's a universal story about there's a lot to unpack for anybody who's had family trauma, and there's a father who's passing, and we are carrying some baggage that dad handed to us that we did not really want. That's a universal story. It just
right.
happens to be told through these two sisters who are of color. And
And
that's
the other side of that is it doesn't have to be a universal story.
No, it
It
does
can be a
not.
real specific
Have
story.
to bridge audiences to get them used to coming, and that to me
Right,
is one of the ways you do it. Is like, oh, this plays for me as well.
right, right. And I'm hoping that audiences aren't just looking for themselves.
No, they're not.
We've expected.
I'm interested in seeing universality, Lou. I'm
Right,
interested. There's nothing that really divides us other than color, and that when you remove that, we're not. You know,
Right.
it's the color, and it's such a meaningless when you really think about it, because we all want the same thing at the end of the day: a safe home. We want our basic needs met. We want to be able, if we have kids, to set them on a course that they are able to take advantage of whatever opportunities, right? So I'm not saying that there aren't stories that I don't recognize, that I don't
Right.
want to see. Saying that how do you begin to create audiences that are blended, that we're all absorbing information, to be like, oh, there's a way forward. If we all embrace our universality, we can figure out the differences. That's
Yeah.
maybe that.
No, that makes sense. But my point, I think, is that we make as white people,
Mm-hmm.
we make the assumption that a play like Ruined is a culturally specific play about an African country, but we don't make the assumption that Death of a Salesman is a culturally specific play, even though it's just as much a culturally specific play as Ruined. Now, both have universal themes. Both
Right.
have things that audiences, if they're open-hearted and open-minded, can connect to. Both are terrific plays. But part of this shakedown that's happening, and I mean shakedown in a positive way, is that we're trying to get away from that idea that white equals the norm,
Right.
that white is the standard and everything else is a variation. I hope
Yes.
that's where
Yeah.
I hope the country is going, both in the arts and in everything else.
No, I think that's and a friend of mine who is an artistic director of a theater in Chicago, and she's of color. She said, you know, that's what you just said is exactly what she points out to, and she points out when she has the opportunity, which is when white artistic leadership talks about anything being, well, this is good or this is bad or this is whatever. There's that you have it all figured out from your point of view, and that's the white supremacist, you know, that those of us who grew up in the majority in a particular country, it's like, well, that's because you grew up in the majority, and the majority was the one who said, well, this is good and that's bad. And how do you look at, like, she's been talking to me about, like, you know, taking plays on journeys when they're in workshops is not make them better, but to take them on a journey and help the playwright hear her or their voice as clearly as possible, and making sure that, you know, A to Z, that there's a nice steady arc, and that stuff that's extraneous can be removed, but not too much, because you want to have some play in the story for the creation of the artist and the director and the actors, but to make sure that, like, what is your play really about, and does it deliver at the end of the night something that the audience is thinking about, that it's not just this is what you're supposed to think, is, oh, how do I process what I just saw, and how does that affect me, right? So yeah, I'm right. And that's been the beauty of us being on Pause of the Phoenix, is it's allowed us to do a whole new strategic business plan. We're now doing some work on our own with inclusion, diversity, and equity and accessibility. We're about to hire a consultant to really help us on an ongoing basis.